Welcome to Romans, God's Solution to Our Problem, a devotional series by Sumo Youth. Make sure you've got a pen and your copy of Romans with you. And if you haven't already, pause the video and pray that Jesus speaks to you through his word today.
Hey everyone, welcome to day 14. Today we're looking at Romans chapter 7 verses 1 to 12, and congrats if you've kept up with us this far. I think this is a really cool passage in the Bible. In reading it for myself, it's clicked pretty much for the first time why we've got the law, and I've learnt more about God and his plan, and also more about myself through that. In our last study, it talked about ourselves as being slaves to sin or slaves to righteousness. But in this one, it talks about it a little differently, and it uses marriage as an illustration. But we'll talk a bit more about that later. So our questions for today, in Paul's illustration: who is our first husband who has died, and who is our new husband? And also, how does the law help us to know sin, and how does it produce sin in us? So have a think about those, pause the video, and then we'll come back and talk about them together. So Paul uses the marriage illustration as being like a contract or something that we're united in. So who was our first husband who has died, and who is our new husband? Well, our first husband was the law, and our new husband is Jesus. As Paul says, "Likewise, my brothers, you have also died to the law through the body of Christ, so that you may belong to another, to him who has been raised from the dead, in order that we may bear fruit for God." So we talked about being married to the law, and how that produced sinful desires and passions in him when he was united to the law and pretty much trying to follow it himself, being good enough himself. But when he died to that and was living to Jesus, united with Jesus, he was able to bear fruit for God and trust in Jesus to help him to be right. So how does the law then help us to know sin, and how does it produce sin in us? Well, basically it helps us to know sin because it tells us exactly what sin is. We wouldn't know not to covet if the law had said do not covet. We wouldn't know do not murder if it said do not murder. So it tells us what sin is, but it also then shows us how much sin we have in our lives by us trying to follow it and failing. We know how sinful we are and how much we need God's help to save us. So I think that's how it produces sin. And Paul ends with the reminder that the law itself is not to blame. The law is holy, righteous and good because it's God's commandments to us and how we should live. But what's sinful is our own desires and us trying to do it our own way, when we see that we really need Jesus to help us, because on our own we just can't do it. So I want you to think more about that, to think about how much we need God's help, how we need him to help us to do the right thing and follow his laws. So pray more about that, and just really think about that this week. How we can make sure that we're dead to the law, we're not living for that, we're not trusting in following the law to save us, but that we're trusting in Jesus and what he can do for us. See you next time.